All right, we've reached the end. Hello again, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over a series of video presentations for Murox JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition textbook for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1000 Web Development Technologies class. All right, we went over chapters 1 through 7 from section 1 and 8 through 12 from section 2 as a class. I've done lectures on 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 2 already on 18, but now I'm going to do my last lecture, I think, for this book, and I'm up to page 570, how to use the module pattern to create jQuery plugins. Now, the author says one of the features of jQuery is that it provides an API that lets you create your own plugin. API is an unbelievably interesting term in my humble opinion. This is my definition of an API. You may not agree with it. Mr. Gudmeston may not agree with it. Other people listening to this lecture may not agree with it. But I look at an API as being a contract. It's a contract between you and the software, where the software says, I agree to provide certain features and functionality for you, and you say, okay, since you're going to provide those for me, I agree to use the software in the way that you intended it to be used. All right? So the author says here, for example, sometimes you may not be able to find a plugin that does what you want, or you don't trust the source. Maybe it's a new plugin that hasn't been downloaded much and hasn't been tested much. Maybe you want to, you can't find anything that actually shows your functionality. So in that case, the author says it makes sense to build your own plugin. Since the jQuery library, as it says, uses the module pattern that we just learned about, the jQuery object is available in your web pages without needing to be called or created. That's why the script element for the core jQuery library must be included before anything else that depends on it. It also means that you can use an IFI to create plugins that augment the jQuery object, and that's shown here on page 571. This first example shows how to use an IFI to import the jQuery object so that it can be modified in here. The second example shows how to make your plugin that you were starting to create, make it chainable. It does this by returning the this keyword. The third example shows you how to make your plugin able to iterate through all selected elements by putting the code inside of the jQuery each method. The fourth example that's here shows how to combine the coding practices in the second and third examples to write plugins that support chaining and implicit iteration. All right? So the API standards for plugins, I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them yourselves. I'd say one thing about it, as it says there, the last two are really important. Options should provide reasonable defaults, and it should be well documented. Next, they show how to code a plugin that highlights the items in a menu. So you can see that Contact Us is where we've got the cursor. It's blue. It would change if we went to one of these. So the code for this, the HTML for the menu is very simple, just a nav bar with an unordered list in it. Here's the CSS, and you'll notice what we're saying here is when we have the mouse over event fire, we're reversing the coloring. So instead of having it be, well, not reverse, I guess, but imagine that was, instead of having a white background and green text, we now have a blue background and white text. As far as adding options to a plugin, to provide plugin options, you code a parameter for the plugin that will receive the options the user sets. In the example you see here, it's named options. To set the default options, you use the $.extend method, which is shown right here. This method merges the properties in the first parameter and object literal with the properties of the second parameter, which is an object literal passed to the plugin by the calling statement. So the chapter and the book, about the last 10 or so pages, ends with a blackjack application that uses a blackjack plugin. So we'll talk about this. Not much depth and breadth of coverage. I read the chapter. I've done nothing with this. This blackjack application uses a custom jQuery plugin to add functionality to the game. The HTML is shown here on page 577. Most of it in here is very simple. All right. There's a div in here with an element of blackjack. The main JavaScript file attaches the plugin to that div element and passes some options. You should know how to play blackjack, also called 21. So the idea is you try to get a better score than the dealer does. If it's a tie, typically the dealer wins. If you score higher than the dealer without getting the 21, if you go over 21, you're called busted. All right? And you can even bet. So the figure that's shown here shows the library file for the deck of cards. The single property of the deck object is an array of strings named cards. Then there's three methods for the deck objects: need shuffling, shuffle, and dealt. The need shuffling method is true if the number of cards remaining in the card array is less than 10. The shuffle method shuffles the cards by calling the reset card function. The deal method of the deck object uses the math.random basically to give you a random card. On 581, they show you the jQuery.blackjack.game.js file. The game has three properties: a dealer property, a player property, and a balance property. The dealer and player properties consist of hand objects, while the balance is a numeric value that keeps track of the player's current balance. The game has 5 methods in it. A deal method, which starts by calling shuffle. Then it stores the instances of hand objects for the dealer and the player. The hit method, which accepts a parameter named hand, whose value indicates if the player or dealer gets another card. Player wins and dealer wins, which work similarly to one another. They each use the busted method and the initial property method to see who's got more points, higher card values, and whether or not one or both of them have gone over 21. The main file of the Blackjack plugin, the jQuery.blackjack.js file, is shown on page 583. The file is pretty long, so the basic jQuery code for things like setting the text on labels, etc., have been removed here for brevity's sake. All right, but it is in the download. The Blackjack plugin uses an IFI, the Modular Pattern, and the API standards we've talked about in this particular chapter. All right, and then finally, on 584 and 585. In the last several figures, we've seen the code for the Blackjack project, or Blackjack plugin, is kept in 4 different JavaScript files. As you probably know, it's easier to develop and maintain code like this, and it encourages code reuse. However, it's easier to use a jQuery plugin and when the code is just in one file. Additionally, the comments and whitespace make the JavaScript file easier for the developer to read and understand, but they also increase the file size and the download time. To address these kinds of issues, you can use a minification tool to remove any extraneous whitespace and comments and line breaks from your JavaScript code to decrease the size. We have talked about this. We have seen this when we looked at the minified version of jQuery. Most of these tools also change the name of local variables to single characters, and they allow you to combine several files into one. The table that you see here on the top of page 585 lists some of the more popular tools for minifying JavaScript. The ones on the left are online tools. The ones on the right can be downloaded. The figure also shows a little bit later here. Whoops, sorry. The user interface for the minification tool at jscompress.com. Says this is the tool that was used to compress the 4 JavaScript files from the project we just finished into the single jQuery.blackjack.min.js file that's actually used. So that's it. We've come to the end of our journey again for another class. As far as the summary, on the bottom half of page 586 and 587, the scope chain refers to what can be seen and used by the object. A closure is created when an inner function refers to one or more objects in the scope of the outer function. Closures can be used to create private state that protects an object's internal functions from outside code. Every function has its own this keyword. Ifs create and invoke a function all at once. A namespace, sorry about that. A namespace is a grouping of certain usually related objects. The modular pattern lets you create a single instance of an object or a singleton that has private state. An accessor property uses functions to read and write, also known as getters and setters. The jQuery library uses the modular pattern. So if you use ifs, so you do use ifs to create plugins that augment the library. jQuery provides an application programming interface or API for creating plugins. And finally, we looked a little bit at code minification tools. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got something out of it. All right. See you in the next class.